Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel. This week we have another very special guest. Her name is Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. You may have heard of her. You should have. She's currently the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, and she's also the Israeli Foreign Ministry's Special Envoy for Innovation and Trade. And most of all for this purpose, she is an eloquent, knowledgeable, passionate defender of Israel, of Zionism, and of the Jewish people. Welcome to Defending Israel, Fleur.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. So unpack for us a little bit about your background. It involves the Sephardic world, it involves Gibraltar, it involves Britain, and of course it involves Israel.
Absolutely. So my family, my father's family, are from Gibraltar. They've been there for 350 years. Originally, both sides of my family, my father and my mother, were Spanish Jews. And when the Inquisition started, both sides ran out of Spain. They decided not to stay in Spain and convert to Catholicism. They ran out. My father's family went to Menorca, which is a little island, Balearic island next to Mallorca.
Menorca, and
Ibiza. Exactly. Right. So Menorca was, at the time, when the Jews were kicked out or they had to leave, it was British. So they went in to seek shelter under another British territory. And they were there for a little bit. And then in the 1700s, Gibraltar also became British, and the British set up a military base because it's in a very strategic place. It's in the entrance of the Mediterranean, and they needed merchants. Who were the merchants? The Jews. So they asked Jews to move back into Gibraltar, which was the first time Jews came back to the Iberian Peninsula after the Inquisition, and my father's family have been there since. My mother's family ran off to Morocco, to northern part of Morocco, and she's from Larache, which is a little place near Tangiers, and that's where my mother grew up. And so that's the Hassan part. Nahoum is my husband's family, and they're Iraqi Jews who then went to India. So in fact, both our sides are Sephardi Jews living under British rule. That's what's interesting, I guess, about our common story, myself and my husband.
So I want to fast forward, I think it was 2001. Here you were a British educated and trained barrister, living in the UK, in London, and smack in the middle of what is referred to as the Second Intifada, you and your family chose to move to Israel, correct?
That's right. At the time, my husband and I. We didn't have kids then.
As we call it, PC, pre-children.
Pre-children, for sure, pre-children. Would have been very difficult to move with children. I admire people who do it. But yes, we knew.
Why?
That's a great question. It was the Second Intifada. We didn't expect the Second Intifada. We had plans to come to Israel. We knew we didn't want to raise a family in the UK. We're both ardent Zionists. I really was excited about being part of the common destiny of the Jewish people in our ancestral homeland, the self-determination of the Jewish people after so many thousands of years of exile. We were very excited about that. And then the Second Intifada broke out, completely unexpectedly, because if you remember, it came on the heels of Israel offering Arafat everything he said he wanted for the Palestinian people, for a Palestinian state.
Including compromise on Jerusalem and the holy sites.
Exactly. He got more in the old city than what Jewish sovereignty would have been, which, thinking about it now, seems so dangerous. But there you go. Everything was offered to Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian people at that point, to create a state. And he not only rejected the offers, he decided to go out to war. Urban warfare in Jerusalem. And we had plans to come before that. And once this happened, my husband and I said, we're not going to change our plans. We still want to build our lives in Israel. And we did. And at the beginning, our families thought we were crazy. And eventually, thankfully, things got better.
No regrets?
Never.
And fast forward again, 23 years later, 4 children?
4 children, thank God, yes.
Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem.
Yes, coming to the end now of my term.
With, I'm sure, much more to follow.
Please God.
So let's turn to the current situation in the time that we have. I know for one thing you've been preoccupied day and night, like so many Israelis, with the fate of the hostages.
Yeah.
Is there anything more from your perspective that can be done by any of the key actors? And the key actors, obviously, apart from Israel and Hamas, it seems to me would include the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, and on the non-governmental side, the International Committee of the Red Cross. How would you assess those actors today, and what more could or should they be doing?
Well, the International Committee of the Red Cross have proven completely useless. I would even say unwilling to put themselves out and do what they claim to do for everybody else. I've believed that for many years the International Committee of the Red Cross have been Israel biased, and I would even dare to say anti-Semitic.
So the same organization that went through its own mea culpa after its disastrous visit to Theresienstadt during the war.
Did they do a mea culpa?
They did do a mea culpa, but obviously it wasn't a very authentic or sincere.
It wasn't authentic
mea
at all.
culpa.
And let me tell you, my mother was a nurse in the 60s, and in Morocco, she applied for a job, and literally they told her, we're not hiring Jews. Oh. And so I don't know what mea culpa they did, but they've always been extremely biased. And on top of that, useless. What have they been doing all those years in Gaza? Propping up a terrorist regime? So let's leave them out because they're useless.
Okay,
if
United
not
States.
Bad actors. The United States could be doing, I think, one more thing, and maybe they are doing it, and I'm not privy to it. But I think the key here is Qatar. Mm-hmm. That's the key. Now, the United States have a military base in Qatar. That's good for the Qataris.
It's also great leverage for the United States.
That's exactly. Also, how much money do the Qataris pour in to this country?
We're beginning to know the answer. It's in the billions, if not tens of billions.
Are you telling me that the United States couldn't leverage its power over Qatari investments, Qatari money, bank accounts, and the military base, and whatever partnerships and collaborations they have in Qatar itself?
Because there are also alternative military possibilities in Bahrain,
Absolutely.
in the UAE, and in Saudi Arabia.
Set up in the UAE. They're a friendly country with a benevolent king that has embraced pluralism and tolerance.
Rejected the Muslim
and
Brotherhood.
Rejected and kicked out the Muslim Brotherhood. Why did they set up a military base with the bad guys? So those are levers that the United States could pull, really pull. And I think the Qataris would then threaten Hamas, listen guys, either you make this deal or we are going to be doing all of these things. And instead what's going on? Israel's getting pressured to do what? Not go into Rafah. So in essence, the Hamas have zero incentive to agree to a deal, because they're getting everything they want by simply using their Goebbels-like propaganda through Al Jazeera, also housed in Qatar, also anti-American, also pro-Iranian, and they have free hand to do whatever they want.
And an Al Jazeera that should not be viewed as a media organization, but as
propaganda channel.
But should be registered as a foreign agent of the government of Qatar, wherever they operate.
Exactly. So could the United States, Europe, and other countries be doing more? Yes, absolutely.
What about Egypt?
Well, Egypt is to me, is a riddle. It's a riddle. It's a country which is steeped in debt. It's on the brink of economic collapse. They have their own problems with their own fundamentalists, the Salafists. Israel helped them get rid of their ISIS and their Salafists in the Sinai Desert. It was Israel intelligence. And what's incredible to me is Egypt has been saved right now economically by the UAE and by the United States and by the World Bank. And nobody is asking them to do anything useful or productive in this war, like taking in women and children temporarily, taking them in temporarily, waiting for the war to finish, and letting them come back.
And why is no one asking them?
I don't know. Maybe they know something I don't, or maybe everybody is just too scared to disrupt the status quo. But the status quo is not good enough. because they have a border with Gaza. And everybody's
Can you repeat
pressurizing
that?
Israel.
Can you repeat that? Because too many people in the world do not understand. Egypt has,
a border with Gaza.
and therefore Egypt could operate as it wishes vis-a-vis Gaza.
Half of Rafah, everybody talks about Rafah, is in Egypt. It's split into two, which means that at the very minimum they could give temporary shelter to people the way that the whole entire Europe has done with Ukrainians.
Right.
And what have the Ukrainians done? The men stayed behind to fight, and they let the women and the children go to Poland and Romania and all of the countries
Where
around
they were
them.
warmly received, by the way.
Warmly received.
Schools, medical care, housing.
Everything.
I saw it firsthand
Everything.
in Poland.
And so this happens. We're in the middle of a war we didn't start. We didn't want this war. But now that we're here, you think that Egypt would lend a hand to its brethren, but they're not interested.
Conversely, they're building higher walls.
They've built 3 walls since October 7th, 3 more walls to close off the border hermetically. That's what they've done.
And topped by barbed wire.
Exactly. And nobody seems to be pulling anything when they're sinking economically. This is the moment to demand something of Egypt. Nobody wants to interrupt the status quo. Everybody's scared. Sometimes you have to shake the box.
So, Fleur, when we look at the Circle of Peace and the 6 countries that are formally part of the sort of peace circle with Israel, and you've been very involved, particularly with the UAE, how would you assess the other countries? We mentioned Egypt. We haven't yet mentioned Jordan. And of course, the 4 newbies, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. How would you assess those 5 since October the 7th? And then, of course, I'll add afterwards the de facto 7th, which is, of course, Saudi Arabia.
So I think that when I think of the disaster that this whole thing has brought upon us, Israel, to our confidence, to the incredible damage and death and destruction that it has caused us in our communities in the north and the south. When I try to muster up a little point of light in all of this, it's the fact that the Abraham Accords are here to stay. How do I know that? A month after October 7th, the Arab League met to pass 3 boycotts. 1 on US military assets in the Gulf, and 2 against Israel, rolling back the Abraham Accords. And the Arab League couldn't pass those 3 boycotts. That's progress. That's what progress looks like. We're not going to see Israeli flags on the streets, right, but that's progress. And what's happened, most recently with the bombing of Iran, unprecedented missiles thrown at Israel, that we had all these countries. We have Saudi admitting, UAE admitting that they helped Israel, and Jordan with planes in the sky. So I think that the proof is not that they helped. The proof is that they're talking about the fact that they helped. That's what's progress. That's progress too. And I think that overall, these Sunni moderate countries understand that the Middle East, and I think indeed the world, is going to split into 2. The countries that want peace and prosperity, and the countries that want jihadi fundamentalism and to change the new order in the Middle East. They want to bring in the bad guys. Now, Iran is the top supplier of drones to Russia. And somehow this gets lost in the weeds. The fact that these bad guys are allied, and they've got a plan, and they've got time, and they've got patience. And so the last thing we should be doing is giving them a whole pass for everything they want to do.
Is there a Winston Churchill in the world today who understands exactly what you said and has the leadership, the eloquence, the vision, the spine, the determination to face this threat?
That's a great question.
Because the threat you describe is, you said regional, but of course, as you know better than anyone, only begins regionally.
It's civilizational. I'm saying already for a long time that Iran is 1930s Germany. Iran is Hitler today. It is the biggest sponsor of terrorism. It imprisons, subjugates its own people. It's cruel. It's genocidal. And they've made it very clear what they want to do with Israel, little Satan, and then the big Satan, which is, of course, the United States of America.
And Iran is protected by both Russia and China, including their veto power in the UN Security Council.
Absolutely. I mean, it's ridiculous. The UN, the whole UN is a farce when you have Iran, who's killing women for showing 3 strands of hair, as part of the Women's Rights Committee. That just shows you. They're also on the Disarmament Committee. You can't make this up. The UN has become a farce of itself. And so...
So, Fleur, back to the question. Does the West have the stomach and the spine?
So you asked about Churchill, and it's something that I use a lot. And I put it on my ex Twitter. A few days ago, I said, where are the Churchills? All we have is Chamberlains. And I actually, you know who? Maybe, and I know this sounds crazy, but maybe MBS. Maybe MBZ, because they seem to get the danger of Iran. MBS is Mohammed bin Salman, the ruler.
Mohammed bin Zayed of UAE.
And Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE. They can see this clearly. And they've been telling the West that this is coming because they've thrown out their own fundamentalists. And they, as Muslims, know better than anyone the damage that ideology can cause. And they've been trying to move their societies against this and towards the future, towards peace and prosperity. So maybe, ironically, they are proving to be the Churchills of today. And what we've seen recently, they're talking about the fact they helped Israel. I think it's great.
That's an interesting and unexpected answer. But before we leave Churchill, let's stay with Britain for a moment, because you live there.
Yes, I did. I'm British.
Does Britain today have the spine and the grit that it summoned in 1939, 1940, when it stood alone, while the United States was neutral and France had fallen? Is that Britain still alive, or has that Britain disappeared?
It's a great question. I would like to think it's still alive, but I'm not sure.
Is that wishful thinking or analytical thinking?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they have the grit, and they've stood alone in many different things. Now we've seen, Brexit. I mean, they've pulled themselves out of situations which they felt is not good for their country. I don't want to have a Brexit argument.
No, and they stood with Israel and the attack from Iran.
And they've stood with Israel, and they had planes in there. They helped us. And so, it's very interesting, because I've got a British friend who I interviewed recently on my podcast, and he said to me, in the end, the British working class will save the day. They know right from wrong. That has to be tested. They did a survey, a poll recently, and I think this is a problem in America too. How many of the young people in these countries, if their country was facing threat, would enlist and fight for their country? And it's actually scarily low. Whereas you have Israel, where kids, 20, 19-year-old kids who were on their global trips, they found a flight, they came home, and they're fighting in the front right now. And we have proven to have a generation that maybe the world sees as a spoiled, selfish generation. But in Israel, that generation has shown us what they're made of. And I'm incredibly, incredibly proud of them.
As you should be, as I think we all are. Fleur, the case for Israel is so, to me, overwhelmingly obvious and powerful, and you've been making it. Why do you think it's so difficult for friends of Israel and Israelis themselves to punch through all of the noise on social media and elsewhere? Are we in fact losing the communications battle, or are the things happening perhaps sparks of light that I haven't seen?
I think we've pretty much lost the communications battle.
Why?
For a number of reasons. Let's start by saying that we are horribly outnumbered. I don't think it's an excuse. I'm just laying out the reasons. So we're horribly outnumbered. There's billions of people, billions of Muslims. Let's say that I don't think all Muslims are pro these people, but we're horribly outnumbered. And then you have something which is very unique, which is the alliance of Islamofascism with the woke liberal left.
What's called the Red-Green Alliance.
It's the most ridiculous thing when if they actually had a conversation, I think they'd end up killing each other. But they have one united thing in common, which is that they both see Jews/Israel, because they don't make a distinction, as the scourge of the earth. And for that, they have a legacy full of different generations of anti-Semites who, as the Lord, the great and late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs would say, anti-Semitism is a mutating virus, and so it always cloaks in the ills of the day. So when my family was kicked out of Spain, it was religious, we were Christ killers, and so of course we should be kicked out, burnt at the stake, whatever. And then we've had a lot of episodes of anti-Semitism from the Spanish Inquisition to the Holocaust, but let's say the other big one is the Holocaust. It was ethnic. Jews...
It was racial.
It was racial, ethnic. So Jews were of lower ethnic value, and of course they were to blame for the humiliation of Germany and its economic problems after World War I.
And if I may, 75 years later, having been accused of polluting the white race,
yes,
we are now portrayed...
We've now become the white colonizers.
There you go. The white supremacists.
And
Israel being the ultimate white colonialist state.
And a completely invented history that doesn't exist, because they've completely erase from history the fact that the Jewish people were sovereign twice before in the land of Israel. Jerusalem, my city, was built and created 3,500 years ago by King David.
You mean it wasn't a Palestinian creation?
Yes.
Jesus wasn't a Palestinian Arab?
Apparently not.
Breaking news on JBS.
Breaking news. And they've completely invented a past that the Palestinians, a lot of people say, oh, the Palestinians, you don't call them Palestinians. I say, look, they have an identity. The identity of the Palestinian people has been created as a contra to the identity of Jews settling in our ancestral homeland. And so today they very much have an identity. I don't reject the Palestinian identity at all, but it's 100 years old. Let's not reinvent history. Anything else is revisionist. Anything else.
And if I understand you, you can make room for that Palestinian identity as long as it does not negate your identity and the identity of Israel and the Jewish people.
Well, I have some very good Palestinian friends who are peace activists, and what they've been telling me for many years is that they need to get to a point when their identity is not based on the erasure of the State of Israel.
Exactly.
And that's the bottom line. Their identity, everything that the Palestinians celebrate, the Nakba, it's the parallel to our Independence Day. Everything is kind of like a dark parallel to whatever the milestones of the State of Israel is. It's about time that the world stop infantilizing the Palestinian people, because that's the real racism. The real racism is saying, oh, no, they can't account for themselves. They can't be non-corrupt. They can't be transparent. It's okay. They say they want to kill you, but they don't mean it. To me, that is the bigotry of low expectation.
Exactly. Here it was termed the racism of low expectation.
Absolutely.
But either way, we have very little time, and I have two questions to ask you, big questions. The first is, if you could, in effect, wave a magic wand for Israel and its communication strategy to the world, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I would convince the leaders in Israel that the communications war is one of the wars that we're fighting. This war, as much as any other war, involves three fronts. The first is military, geographical. The second is diplomatic. And the third is public diplomacy, let's call it. Hearts and minds, the consciousness of people. And we're not even in the arena for number three. And the reason we're not is because the governments, successive governments, I'm not going to blame any particular government, successive governments forever have seen public diplomacy as a nice to have, not a need to have. And today what we've seen is, and I think this war has brought it home to the Israelis, I've seen them engage in public diplomacy more than ever I've seen them woken up, because they've realized that when you're losing the public diplomacy war, it's affecting your military war.
Totally.
We haven't been into Rafah, where the terrorists are, where they're hiding the hostages, where everything that is left of Hamas is there. Why haven't we gone in? Because public diplomacy has meant that the leaders have been affected by the people to pressurize Israel instead of pressurizing Hamas to take the deal and essentially accept a temporary ceasefire. And that is because we have not seen public diplomacy as a real war. And the arrogance of that is that you have public diplomacy in Israel split into 7 different government offices, government ministries, different people who don't know anything about the subject, people who are not professionals in the subject, and people who don't hire the right people. And that's our problem.
And what you were saying between the lines, I think, also was that public response has affected even the United States and the approach of the White House vis-a-vis Rafah, vis-a-vis restraint on Iran. But that's for another day.
Well, it doesn't help that you guys are in an election year. It might have been very different had you not been.
But here we are. But my last question, you're speaking to hundreds of thousands of Jewish and pro-Israel homes on this show. Don't just tell them what they should know informationally. Give them a charge. What would you like to see the pro-Israel community and American Jews do, maybe that they haven't been doing or doing well enough to really help?
Well, I think that the diaspora communities, such as the community in America, have been amazing. Honestly, I think that there's been an awakening after October 7th that I haven't seen for many years. People were talking about the Israel diaspora split, but what this has all proven is that we're one family, we're one tribe. And at the very minimum, I ask everybody to give Israel, to give your family the benefit of the doubt. And at best, go out and fight in every arena possible, whether it's your Instagram, whether it's your congressman or woman, whether it's your workmates. Try and spread the truth of who the Jewish people are, what we've built in the most impossible circumstances, and how we are peace-loving people. All we have done is defend our country and our people so that we can survive in the roughest neighborhood in the world and thrive amongst the most impossible circumstances. I want them to be proud and strong and really to take the heritage with them of thousands of years and move forward and look forward and be very positive about our destiny.
Beautiful. So, if it were not 2001 but 2024, you and your husband were living in London, would you make Aliyah today?
I absolutely would, but I wouldn't have stayed in London until 2024.
Fleur, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. JBS viewers, I promised you a knowledgeable, passionate, and eloquent spokesperson. You just heard it. I hope you'll spread her message far and wide. I want to thank Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, the outgoing Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, but the permanent voice of the vision of Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people as extraordinary partners and players on the international stage. Thank you very much. See you next time.